For those who don't know yet, the CLI for M365 is a way to automate stuff on your M365 tenant. And what we're going to talk about today is running it in Azure containers, because the CLI is actually providing you with a Docker container. You can run that in the Azure container instances. So I want to show some samples that does exactly that. Now, if you don't know the CLI for M365, I see that I even put in a really old version. Obviously, that should be 7.2 rather than 3.4.0. But CLI believes that we should be able to run and manage your M365 environment from any platform. So it's a cross-platform way to manage M365 services with regardless of the platform or tool chain. It should be easy to use, and once you're signed in, it should just work. It's a great way, at least I would say, to manage your M365 environment. And that means that it runs on any OS, so Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. It runs on any shell, PowerShell, Bash, Commander, whatever it's your picks. And it's one login. You sign in once, and then you can manage all those different services that make up the M365 experience. Now let's go to demos. If you want to learn more, aka.ms/CLI M365 link will be posted in the chat and it's part of the slides. But if you go there, we've got some help. It contains all the details that you need to get started. If you want to install it locally, make sure you have npm installed, and you can do the npm global and the CLI for M365. But the cool thing is you can actually run it in a Docker container. And if you are aware, within within Azure Container Instances, you can actually pull in Docker containers. So what I did is I created a Azure Logic app, and that Azure Logic app will actually take care of everything we need to do. Just to make sure that we don't have to wait, I will run this demo, and it's going to take like a minute or two to do everything. In the meantime, we walk through what actually is happening. So let me edit this Logic app, and let's see what it creates. 1, 2, 3. So what I did is I put this one on a recurrence trigger. Obviously, you can use any trigger you like. And within Logic Apps, what you can do is you can create a Azure Container Instance. Now, in order to create a Azure Container Instance, you'll need a container group and a container name. So I created 2 variables called container group, container name. I put in a somewhat unique number, namely the ticks for the current date time, so that if I run it multiple times, I at least know that I have multiple container instances rather than it tries to create one that already exists. But here is where the magic happens. There is an action to create a container group or create or update a container group. And if you use this, you'll need to specify where that Azure Container Instance needs to be created. So you specify a subscription ID, a resource group, you give the container group name, you'll have to specify the location. So I put this one in the central US location, and then you actually can configure what you want to do with that container instance. And what we want to do is we want to specify the container image, and we're going to say, make sure to pull in the CLI M365 latest Docker container image that is out there. We always want to have the latest and greatest. Now, we don't really care about the amount of CPU and request memory because we're not doing too much complex stuff. So the container itself shouldn't need too much resources. This is just the minimum, should be good for this sample scenario. And then finally, what we're going to do is we're going to say in this container image, what we want to do is we want to run a bash command, and we want to run this specific script, and we're going to give in some additional segments. So segment 3 and segment 4, this is actually the user ID that we're passing in, and this is the site that we're passing in. Now, obviously, you can add additional segments. What this means is it will try to run a script. Now, obviously, if you pull in a Docker container, that script is not there yet. So what we need to do as well is we'll need to move down a little. And if you spin up an Azure container image, what you can do is you can hook up a Git repository to it. So what we do is we say, okay, we're going to load in this specific Git repository. We give it a volume name called Git repo. And what that will do is it will actually pull in this specific Git repo where I make sure that there are several scripts. So if you remember, we called demo3.sh, and here you see that it will try to execute this specific script. This script will set some config, and then it will do a SharePoint user list for any given for any given site. So what we did is we passed in a specific site URL. So if all is correct, what this would do is it will try to get all the external users for that given site. Now, this is just part of the solution, because if you want to do this, you have to make sure that permissions are in place. And what I didn't want to do is I didn't want to specify the permissions, or I didn't want to make sure that this run, I want to do this in a secure way. So what we are doing, we're actually assigning a user assigned managed identity to this specific Azure container instance, meaning that any script that gets executed in this Azure container instance actually uses that managed identity to do everything. So here you see you can specify the container group managed identity, user assigned managed identity, and you need to do two things for that. You have to make sure that the managed identity that you specify actually is contributor on the resource group. Otherwise, we cannot check what the current status of the Azure container instance is. And because we're running scripts against our M365, we need to make sure that it has Microsoft Graph permissions. So for instance, if you want to do something with sites, we want to make sure that it has sites read all. If you do something with files, you need to do the read write all, group read all. If you want to do things with teams, you need additional permissions. So based on the types of scripts that we're trying to run, you might need some additional permissions here, but it's easy to hand out those permissions if you know how that works. Now, with that, that's all we need to do to spin up our Azure container instances, load a specific script, and then what happens is the container instance gets created. What we then can do is we can just start pulling it up until the moment that it is succeeded. So what we do is we retrieve the properties of the container group, we check those properties to be succeeded, and if they are succeeded, what we'll do is we'll get the logs. And if they're not succeeded yet, we're going to wait for 10 seconds. And once that we're done, if we do get the logs, we can delete the container group because we no longer need it. The script has been executed and we do have the logs. Now, if I go back, it should be finished by now. And let's have a quick look at how that looks. Here you see that it pulled it for 5 times. Can move on to the 5th iteration. There we go. And what you will see is if I go to get logs from container instance, here you see that I get a JSON blob back that says, oh, apparently there is Albert-Jan Schot as an external user on this environment. This is his email address, is not expiration, is share email. So all the properties that you would get for an external user are shared. Apparently there is another one. So I get the JSON of all the external users for the site that I put in. Now, this is running it as a sample scenario with a bash script. Obviously, you can do the exact same thing as a PowerShell script. So if I go to the other sample scenario, what it is here is I can run it with a payload. And what I'll need to do is I'll need to say this is script, and then I'll need to figure out what the correct script is. So I think it was it's demo 5, too many demos. So what I can do is I can say I'm going to do demo 5.ps1. Let's run it. It's going to take a second. And what you will see is there will be a new run being started. The only difference is, and I'm going to look through one that's already finished to make sure that we're not wasting too much time. This is the trigger that uses when an HTTP request is received. Here you see that I passed in demo 5.ps1, and instead of running the bash script, it's almost the same. It's still starting the container with my demo 5.ps1, and here you see this is a slightly different script. So what demo 5 as a script does, let me go to the script. This is actually retrieving all the redirect sites that I have on my environment. So any site that I gave a different URL, if I did a rename site or change the URL, this will check all those sites. So it will retrieve them. Then for each site that it retrieved, it will try to see if it can still be found. and it will explain to me saying, okay, the redirect still does exist, so the target location where it redirects to still exists, or if your target location has been deleted, so you rename the site and you then deleted the new site, the redirect still exists on your environment. This will tell me, oh, this target no longer exists, should be removed. So I get sort of a report that explains some stuff. So let's see if it's already done here. I can go to the 6th iteration. Gonna take 1 or 2 seconds. There we go. 6. And if I go here, if I read the logs, what I will see is, okay, apparently I have a mail test that has been redirected to mail test old. It still does exist. Apparently I also have some hub site, some renamed hub site. Hey, the new location no longer exists and should be removed. Obviously, I can expand this script to, rather than reporting what needs to be done, automatically delete all those samples. So if you want to get a glimpse of what is possible, if you go to the sample script location, we do have a bunch of sample scripts out there with samples around the Power Platform or Power Automate, around SharePoint Online, around Teams, and all those different samples can be run within the Docker container. And all you need to do to do that is have either a logic app or a function to create your Azure container instances, load in the correct GitHub repository, and make sure that you have a managed identity that has contributor permissions on the resource group that you're actually doing stuff, or have the enterprise application registration with the appropriate Microsoft Graph permissions to retrieve everything. And with that, that was my 12 minutes of demo.